On the 12th of October, 1998, a cashier at a Circuit City store slid a small silver disc across the counter and told a customer something that made no sense yet. The disc looked exactly like a normal movie. It felt like one in your hand. But the moment you pressed play, a clock started running inside it, and 48 hours later, it would refuse to play again unless you paid for it a second time. The company selling you this disc was the same company that 10 years earlier had been the single best investment on the entire American stock market. A chain so profitable that Wall Street simply could not find another retailer to compare it to. And in a few more years, this same company would be gone, its buildings empty, its name sold off for scraps to pay debts that once seemed unthinkable. This is not really a story about a disposable disc. It is a story about a company that got so good at outsmarting the market that it forgot to ask its own customers what they actually wanted. And by the end of this video, you will see exactly how that one habit, repeated 4 separate times over 20 years, is what finally closed every single door. The story starts almost 50 years earlier, in 1949, in a barbershop in Richmond, Virginia. A traveling salesman named Samuel Wurtzel was on vacation from Ohio when he sat down for a haircut and watched something he had never seen before. On a small screen in the corner of the shop, a live broadcast was playing. Television had just arrived in the South, and Wurtzel understood immediately that almost nobody in that city owned a set yet to watch it on. Within months, he had moved his entire family to Richmond and opened a small appliance store. He named it Ward's, a name built entirely out of the people he loved, his own name Samuel, his wife Ruth, and his 2 sons Alan and David, each letter standing for someone who sat at the family table. For years, Ward's stayed a modest chain of a handful of storefronts. Then, in the mid-1970s, the company built something new, a warehouse showroom stacked floor to ceiling with televisions and stereo equipment, priced far below what a department store would charge, staffed by people who could explain exactly what you were buying. Customers who had spent years comparing 3 models in a cramped shop suddenly found themselves walking through aisles of 40. It worked so well that by 1978, the format had a new name, Circuit City Superstore, and a plan to put one in every city big enough to fill it. Through the 1980s, that plan detonated. Circuit City Superstores went from 8 locations to more than 50 in just 4 years, and by 1987, the company had crossed $1 billion in annual sales. Somewhere in that same decade, Circuit City stock did something that almost no company in America has repeated since. Over 10 years, its share price rose by more than 9,000%, a return so extreme that when magazines later ranked the best-performing stocks of the entire decade, Circuit City sat at the very top of the list, ahead of every oil company, every bank, every technology firm that existed before the internet did. By the late 1980s, a new chief executive, Richard Sharp, was running the company, and he was handed a strange opportunity. A smaller regional electronics chain out of Minnesota called Best Buy came looking for a buyer and offered itself to Circuit City for around $30 million. Sharp turned it down. On paper, it looked like a rounding error compared to what Circuit City was worth at the time. Sharp kept building instead. In 1991, he and an executive named Austin Ligon sketched out a side project inside the company, an idea for a giant, no-haggle used car lot, run with the same big-box confidence Circuit City had brought to television sets. They called it CarMax. It opened its first store in 1993, and by 1997, it was healthy enough to go public as its own tracking stock, raising more than $400 million while still living entirely inside Circuit City's corporate shadow. It would eventually become worth more on its own than almost anyone inside Circuit City expected. But somewhere inside that same confidence sat the seed of a fatal habit. In 1997, Circuit City partnered with an entertainment law firm to invent something nobody in Hollywood and nobody in any living room had actually asked for, a movie format designed to expire. They called it DIVX. On the surface, it looked identical to the DVD players just beginning to appear in stores. Underneath, it worked completely differently. A DIVX disc cost around $4.50, cheaper than renting a movie from a video store. But the moment you pressed play, a 48-hour countdown began. When the countdown ran out, the disc simply stopped working, frozen, unless you called in and paid to unlock it again. The players themselves cost roughly $500, about $100 more than an ordinary DVD player that never expired at all. Circuit City launched DIVX nationally on the 12th of October, 1998, backing it with a marketing budget of well over $1 million for the holiday season alone. Customers tried it, briefly, out of curiosity. Then they stopped. By early 1999, DIVX sales had collapsed by more than 85%, and rather than quietly ending the experiment, Circuit City kept spending on it anyway, convinced the idea itself was still right, and the public simply had not caught up yet. It hadn't. On the 16th of June, 1999, Circuit City finally pulled the plug on DIVX entirely, after tax losses of around $114 million, on a product that had asked customers to accept less ownership, less freedom, and a countdown clock in exchange for a company's own idea of how movies should work. DIVX should have taught Circuit City something simple, that customers, not corporate strategy meetings, decide what they actually want to buy. Instead, the company seemed to learn the opposite lesson, and it repeated the pattern for the next decade. This is the part most people get wrong about Circuit City. So if you want to see how one bad bet turned into a habit that never broke, stay with me. In 2000, still profitable, still enormous, Circuit City decided its customers didn't really want to buy washing machines and refrigerators from an electronics chain anymore. It walked away from large appliances entirely, abandoning a business that had brought in $1.6 billion in sales the year before and spent an estimated $1.5 billion retrofitting its stores around the decision. 3 years later, in 2003, the company decided something else its customers apparently didn't need: commissioned salespeople who actually knew the products inside and out. It eliminated commissions across the board, moved thousands of experienced staff onto flat hourly wages, and let go of 3,900 of them outright, to save an estimated $130 million a year. Each decision, on its own, had a spreadsheet logic behind it. Together, they formed a pattern. A company that had once won by being smarter than the market had quietly convinced itself it no longer needed to listen to the people walking through its own doors. None of this happened in a vacuum. While Circuit City was busy relearning the same lesson, its old $30 million rejects at Best Buy were doing something almost boring by comparison: listening. Best Buy kept knowledgeable staff on the floor, invested heavily in supply chains and store experience, and let its prices and product mix track exactly what shoppers were actually buying: flat-screen televisions, digital cameras, the first wave of home computers built for everyday families. Best Buy expanded store by store into markets Circuit City had already written off as saturated, often opening within sight of a Circuit City parking lot and simply waiting for shoppers to compare the two for themselves. By the early 2000s, the two chains that had once been rivals of roughly equal size were no longer close. Best Buy's stores felt current. Circuit City's felt like they were still trying to convince you of something. Meanwhile, Circuit City's own strange side project, CarMax, quietly spun off to shareholders in 2002 and left to run entirely on its own terms, was becoming one of the most successful specialty retailers in the country, opening dealership after dealership across dozens of states, run by exactly the kind of customer trust the parent company kept struggling to hold on to. By 2007, Circuit City needed a dramatic fix, and its leadership found one more version of the same old instinct. On the 28th of March that year, the company announced it was laying off around 3,400 of its highest-paid, most experienced sales associates, the very people who had spent years building the product knowledge Best Buy could not easily copy. Starting wages for their replacements dropped from $8.75 an hour to $7.40. Some of the fired staff were even told they could reapply for their old jobs in 10 weeks at the lower rate. Sales did not recover. Within a year, the company that had once been the best-performing stock in America was trying to buy Blockbuster Video, another struggling chain, for as much as $1.3 billion, an offer it quietly withdrew that same July as its own finances kept sliding. 2 months later, the chief executive behind the layoffs resigned. 2 months after that, On the 10th of November 2008, Circuit City filed for bankruptcy protection, listing $3.4 billion in assets against $2.3 billion in debt. There was no buyer waiting in the wings. On the 16th of January 2009, the bankruptcy converted to full liquidation. By the 8th of March, every remaining store, 567 of them, closed its doors for the last time. More than 30,000 people lost their jobs in that final closure alone. Walk into a CarMax dealership today, and you are standing inside Circuit City's one truly lasting idea. A business built on the same instinct to challenge an old, tired way of buying something, except this time built around trust instead of tricks, transparent pricing, a no-pressure sales floor, cars you could actually return if you changed your mind. It grew into one of the largest used car retailers in the country, worth many times more than the parent company that gave birth to it. The company that spun it away in 2002 never seemed to notice what made it work. DIVX asked customers to trust a countdown clock. The 2007 layoffs asked customers to trust store staff who no longer knew the products. CarMax asked customers to trust that they would not be cheated, and customers said yes. The idea underneath was never really bad. Circuit City just kept choosing to build it anywhere except inside Circuit City. A few months after the last store went dark, the Circuit City name itself, once printed across 700 storefronts and a stock chart nobody could beat, was sold off along with its website for $14 million, a rounding error next to what the brand had once been worth, bought by a company most former shoppers had never heard of. Look back across the whole arc, and the same shape appears again and again. 1998, sell customers a disc that stops trusting them after 48 hours. 2000, stop selling them the appliances they still wanted. 2003, stop paying the salespeople who actually knew what they were talking about. 2007, fire the ones who were left. Each decision came from a boardroom, convinced it understood the customer better than the customer understood themselves. And each one was proven wrong within a year or two, not by a competitor's brilliant new idea, but simply by shoppers quietly deciding to walk somewhere else instead. Circuit City did not die because the electronics business collapsed. Best Buy sold the exact same televisions in nearly identical stores a few miles down the road and thrived. Circuit City died because it kept mistaking its own cleverness for its customers' loyalty 4 separate times across 4 separate decades, until there was nobody left standing in the aisles to sell anything to. The company that once turned 9,000% for its shareholders in a single decade shut its very last register for good on the 8th of March 2009, and there was nobody left to ring up the sale. If this is the first Circuit City story you have heard that was not just about the layoffs, that is the point. The real pattern runs much deeper than one bad year. If you want more stories like this, about empires that talk themselves into their own downfall, subscribe. There is a new one waiting every week. And if you ever bought a DIVX disc or remember a countdown clock ticking on your own television, tell us about it in the comments below.